Hey everybody, back again. So this is a little bit of a sneak preview video. Some people who have watched the video before may have said, "Really, is that really the best way? I minus minus. I don't know. That seems dubious in terms of programming conventions. You really want to do that?" We're going to get into a new topic this week on what to do when you want a loop to run a certain amount of times, but you don't know how many times it's going to run. So for loops are really great structures for when you know exactly how many times you want to run. We used a for loop here when another kind of loop would probably be better. We haven't covered those in class, and that's why I didn't talk about it in that last video. But let's try to do this, right? So if maybe you were somebody who watched the video and said, really, that's not the right way to do it. Again, remember, we're dealing with AP Computer Science with a certain amount of content that we've covered and some stuff that we haven't. So at least let's try to kind of like do this in a smarter way. Okay, I'm not gonna delete this because I'm gonna borrow code from it. I'm gonna take stuff and snip it and put it up here. Let's talk about a new kind of loop that we're gonna get into. This is called the while loop, and the while loop is really good for running loops that you don't know how many times they're gonna run. Okay, so I'm gonna just put a comment here. It's good for when you don't know how many times. So one thing we didn't keep track of in the first iteration of this code was, I wonder how many times it took for it to actually generate the number of questions that it was asked for. Let's say we asked for 10 questions, and what more than likely it took way more than 10 loops to actually get 10 valid questions. We don't know how many times that ran. So probably a better loop structure is going to be the while loop. And remember what goes in here. Let's see if we can say this. While the number, let's go ahead and sort of start a variable up here called the number of valid questions generated. Okay, so this is going to represent the number of valid questions generated, and let's start it off as 0. And so let's say while the number of valid questions generated is less than the number of questions total, right? If I can grab that. We want this loop to run for that amount of time. So this loop is just going to run over and over and over and over and over and over until the number of valid questions is not less than the number of questions. And that will happen exactly when we want it to. And let's kind of show how. Okay, so we're going to borrow a lot of this same logic. Okay, so let's grab this whole block here, which was checking to see if it was going to be an integer answer, and then go ahead and display the question, prompt the answer, check to see if the answer is right, and then go ahead and go back around again. We can, first we need to grab these declarations, don't we? So let's borrow this as well. I think I may also have an extra curly brace in the process of copy pasting. Let's go ahead and, this is the danger you run into when you're copy pasting. What's that paired up with? What's that paired up with? Okay, so I don't like having these two curly braces right on top of each other. If this happens to you, what I recommend doing is taking those and indenting it so that you can kind of see the structure. This is clearly now ending the while loop. This is clearly ending the if statement. And this really should be backed up. So I'm going to go ahead and move this stuff back. That looks better to me. Okay, so look out for that stuff when you're doing your programming as well. Make sure it's visually organized the way you want it to. We need to keep track of the number of valid questions in here. Okay, so the number of valid questions generated at the beginning is 0. So is 0 going to be less than number of questions? Let's use 10 in our mind. Okay, let's just say 10. Okay, is 0 less than 10? Yes, this loop will run. So we want to go ahead and increment that number of valid questions. As soon as we get an answer that's going to be an integer, let's go ahead and say, all right, a valid question has been generated. And so what do we say? The number of valid questions, let's just copy that. I could have done this another way. Let's just keep track of that right off the bat. Valid questions is now increased by 1. Having some tab issues here. So this means we have a valid question generated a valid question. And if it's correct, it'll still count it the same way it did before in our previous loop. If not, then the number of valid questions does not get incremented, and it'll just go back up to the top and start over. And this is just a much more sound way to do this. So I'm just going to delete this real quick. We don't like this anymore because maybe remember what the for loop is for? A for loop is really good when you know exactly how many times you want it to run. We managed to use this structure with a little bit of trickery down here by setting I backwards and trying again. But really, for loops should probably be reserved for when you know exactly how many times they're going to run before the loop begins. This way is a little bit cleaner and probably follows a little bit more coding conventions. The number of valid questions will only be incremented if we generate an integer answer question. And that way we don't have to set anything back. This loop will run over and over again until the number of valid questions reaches, say, 10. And then at the end of this question, on the 10th question, on question number 9, I guess it would be, right, 0 through 9. And then the number of valid questions would run out. It would equal 10. 10 is not less than 10, and the method ends. So this is probably a better way to go ahead and do this one without that trickery of setting I backwards. So remember, while loops, they're really good for when you don't know how many times you want the loop to run, and you increment only under certain conditions. And that way, once that variable gets high enough, then you will exit the while loop, and the while loop will no longer perform what's inside of it. So let's talk about that later this week, but this is probably a cleaner way to do it. Of course, there are more ways than this, but this is just another way as we add to our repertoire of Java constructs. Hope you guys like it. See you guys soon.